me I'm gonna lose 2 years' salary? You'll never make that.
What's your morning look like?
Or at least not the earning.
I've got maybe when?
Oh, I'm flexible, so let me see what's going on. I thought I would send you that site questionnaire. Maybe highlight a couple things. He wants short answers, not books.
Okay.
I've got a meeting with him at 2 this afternoon to review this. So I thought we could
If
just,
your 9:30 doesn't take long,
Yeah,
you've got
so,
time after that.
I'll just email
they
it to
can't
you.
come back on as independent contractors.
Maybe
They
like
can go to work for a minute,
It's on it, just
come back,
if you don't know, then we'll just
and
say.
then it's just, there's some of them
Got my
would,
email
or
or
some
come?
would.
just come to my office at 11. That way we're talking it through.
Sounds good. I like it. Thank you.
Hello, Lee. I'm good. How are you?
I thought I had it solved because they have a.
Hi, Fuzzy. What's up with that? I like it.
He's on his way.
There's the mayor.
Oh, I know.
Oh, hello, bright and shiny guy.
Commissioner, how are you? Good to see you.
All right, he's right.
Excellent. How are you?
The Commish. Lodsky. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. It is a good morning.
Well, I have,
Deep text
yeah,
and
so,
cruise
so,
for
that's my
1,
concern
2,
as well.
3, 4,
And I do know,
6.
on November 29th,
Oh,
just
listen to anybody?
personally,
I don't think Mr. Cass will be here this morning.
Yeah, he said he was. Do you know what he was in the hospital for?
I just have to wait a couple of
Yeah,
months.
he
to
said
get
he
the
wasn't going to
checks.
be here.
I do not know.
But
Who's that,
I
Matthew
haven't
Glenn?
registered this yet.
Or Cass?
I haven't looked.
Kevin Cass. I have not heard from Mr. Glenn this week. I was in Dallas last week, so I missed our
And they're
time together.
Usually Chase would do that.
It's hard to be in two places at the same time when one of them is.
And his birthday is May
So
13th.
far away?
Okay, that's good enough for me. Yeah,
It's all right. Y'all landed just perfect.
yeah, so once we max this, worst case, I can throw that in there and know I'm pretty close.
Reimbursed another 2.5% of tax conversion receipts
Yeah, so
generated by the
the
sale
part
of
we're
receipts.
missing is
That's your gavel. Not your gavel.
This is my girl.
the
Oh, oh, oh.
lifetime, the actuary.
Commission's going to have to replace George. Yeah. Glad George got that position. I support him. Me too. I didn't. I think he's a good friend of mine, but I just tried to get such a community guy. It was good. Miss Claire, do we have a quorum? Are you right? Are you guys ready?
We ready
Is
for
this?
the,
Okay. I will call this meeting to order. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
First of all, congratulations to Commissioner Jones. Sorry that we're losing him off this committee. I guess the city is the commissioners are the ones that appoint somebody. Have that process started, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. We have advertised for the position to be filled, and now we're just waiting on applications to be received, and then once we receive applications, we will take those to the city commission for recommendation.
Okay. Claire, Claire, would you like to call order, please? Call roll? I called order.
Certainly. Brett Johnson,
Present.
Raymond Mondragon.
Here.
Kevin Cass sends his apologies. David Robinson.
Here.
Matthew Glenn sends his apologies. Alan Kinland.
Present.
Joseph Blaschke.
I'm here.
Gail Tarson. Sorry.
Here.
Okay. Has everyone had a chance to look over the minutes of the February 23rd meeting?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we will need to add Gail Tarson's name as the person that was present at the last meeting.
I exist. Thank you, Claire.
With that addition, Mr. Chairman, I'll call for approval of the minutes.
Okay, we have
Seconded.
a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay. Justin Holwalt, would you like to talk about the LEDA for retail?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of
Yes.
the board. And first off, I'd like to recognize and thank the members of the legal LEDA for Retail Task Force. And those members were Mr. Blaschke, Ms. Tarson, Ms. Snowberger, Mr. Malloy, Mr. Jones, Dr. Nwankwo, and Mr. Montoya. They did a great job helping us sift through information, compile information, make recommendations on what language should look like, and obviously in both the ordinance as well as the procedures. And so really just wanted to take this opportunity to thank them for the time that they put in and the commitment that they put into putting these policies together. So thank you to them. In front of you today, you have obviously both the policies and procedures as well as the ordinance. The basis for everything that we did was taking what we had in place for industrial development and then adapting it to retail. And so a lot of these principles were laid out for us, and then we obviously made those modifications as necessary. So what I thought we could do is just kind of go through this page by page. I'll point out the highlights of the major changes that were made. And then, of course, if any of the members that were on the task force want to add, they certainly are welcome to. And then if you have any questions as we go through this, please feel free to ask, and we don't have to wait to the end, so we can just have a discussion regarding what the policies and procedures are. Obviously, the first page is just the table of contents. And one thing that we did try to do throughout the document is in our industrial development policies and procedures, while we continue to work with and will continue to work with what is now the CED, previously they were named throughout this document as CIDC. And so instead of in the actual policies and procedures naming the organization, we just changed it to agent. That way, if there is a name change, we don't have to go back and change and readopt our policy and procedures. We, in the appendix, we point out who that agent is. So that is a change that we made throughout the entire document itself. So on page 3 of the document, the Clovis Economic Development Tax Program overview, not a lot of changes to that particular section. And so just stuck with what was within the existing policies and procedures. Same with the program management and administration. That stayed the same, as well as the Economic Incentive Board duties and responsibilities. So don't panic. We haven't added any additional duties and responsibilities to this particular board, other than potentially reviewing a new type of application that has not been in front of this board previously.
Mr. Holwell,
Yes, sir.
on page 3, under the Clovis Economic Development Tax Program Overview, line 4, the Clovis City Commission, I underlined potential recommendations include gross receipts reimbursement. potential, and then I have other underlined, under line 5, infrastructure and other local economic development incentives. And that language is also in the same as the previous one that we had?
Yes.
For some reason, that kind of caught my brain, the potential recommendations. What does that mean?
Well, obviously, the city commission has the final authority, and so whether your recommendation is for or against something, it still is heard by the city commission, and so.
Okay, thank you for, okay.
And then
Now I
other
understand.
incentives.
'Cause I was thinking in my brain, other potential incentives, and if so, what are those?
Yeah, and so that's kind of the catch-all blanket.
Yeah.
And so while it may not be defined exactly in here, as we're working with an entity, and you'll see that we say other later in the document as well, to where if in order to recruit a particular business, if they don't fit within the box, and we need to, and we still want to work with them, that certainly leaves us open to being able to work with outside.
Makes sense. Thank you.
On page 5, line 16, that's where we start talking about the gap analysis. And so everything that we do and you'll see this reflected throughout the document as well, everything that we do with retail is based on the gap analysis that will be approved by the city commission. And so, for example, obviously we're working with Retail Strategies currently, and they have developed a gap analysis for the city of Clovis. And so they look at the amount of demand for the market, and they look at the supply for the market. And so obviously the difference between the two is how they've generated what they're calling a gap in that particular sector. And so that, once again, is a guiding principle throughout this entire document, and everything is based off of that gap analysis, as you'll see in the future with like our pass-fail conditions.
Mr. Howell, on
Absolutely.
page 4, if you could go back, line 13, the chairperson of EIB shall present. Should we add, in case the chairperson is unable to present, the chairperson or designee of EIB? Just include that, if you don't mind, just.
We certainly can do that.
And on page 39, or on line 40, I know I'm trying not to be technical, of economic, just separate that.
Yep.
Where is he?
Line 40.
Coordinate and work with them. Okay.
We thought we caught them all. Thank you. I'm going to take a new strategy on this. Any other questions on page 5?
No. No. I'll have some more, but no.
That's okay. Thank you. Page 6, once again, and follow the same verbiage that's within the industrial policies and procedures. Of course, everything, and it's important to talk about the case-by-case basis. Everything we look at is on a case-by-case basis. So in our recommendations, we recommend, or we say up to 2.5% or up to 50%. And so obviously based on maybe how they fit into the gap analysis or what their potentially benefits they're providing to the community, that will judge those. So everything is on a case-by-case basis. It's not a set formula saying, you've done this, you get this. So sticking with that same theme.
Mr. Howell, on page 6, line 29, where it
policies and
says, the Economic Incentive Board Ordinance, comma, this policies and procedures manual,
Yeah, this policies and procedures.
Are you wanting to read the policies and procedure manual rather than this?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can change that.
That throws it off a
Yep.
little bit. So and then on line 39, make a long-term commitment to the community. Expectations of performance of a retail business. What kind of a long-term commitment are we talking about?
And so the maximum amount that they can receive the retail incentive for is 10 years. And so, we don't define, obviously, long-term commitment. Because in retail, it can change. And so we just simply didn't define it in there. Like I said, the maximum we can go is up to 10 years. Depending on how they perform, they could earn the value of the land, buildings, and infrastructure back sooner than that 10 years, but no more than that 10 years. So if you wanted to define a long-term commitment, I would assume 10 years is a long-term commitment, but that would all be worked out potentially in the PPA agreement. And once again, it's a performance-based strategy, so if they are not successful, there's nothing out of the pockets of the city of Clovis, because we're reimbursing something that they've put into to the city of Clovis.
And thank you for mentioning the PPA, because I was going to recommend that since this is a 10-year loan or grant
Reimbursement.
or what have you under the retail, is so we won't scare off that prospect to them in their minds. Okay, can you tell me what a long-term commitment is in economic development? And so I would keep it within the confines of within that 10-year gap.
Okay. So like I said, the maximum they can have is up to 10 years.
Right. Thank you.
Back on line 29, if we change this policies and procedures manual to the policies and procedures, we have to reference which one it is. So it has to say the LEDA for retail policies and procedures manual. This is self-referential, so it implies the one I'm holding.
And we can certainly add in retail for LEDA policies and procedures.
Mr. Mondragon, on line 39, I mean, you're wanting to drill down on that a bit more to say to make a long-term commitment to the community for the lifetime of the agreement with the city of Clovis? Or are you okay with it to stay like it is?
I'm okay for it to stay like it is, but outline it in the PPA.
Thank you.
I think that honestly, I think that gets tricky.
Yeah.
Because from a retail standpoint, if that retailer is not successful, we're going to require them to stay in business and continue to lose money potentially. So I don't think we want to define how long they actually have to be here. Once again, everything that's refunded is based off of performance. So if they're not generating gross receipts, they're not going to be earning gross receipts back.
And
Does that make sense?
I kind of fought with this, to be honest with you, with this language, because my thought was, okay, terms, the long-term commitment, but then you're right on the PPA, you're going to outline it based under the terms of the contract of the retail ordinance. So I'll be fine with that, yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the EIB, Mr. Mondragon, this make a long-term commitment to the community is in the other policies and procedures manual regarding industry incentives and has been.
Yes, yes, I read that.
Page 7, verbiage, pretty much the same as the industrial development policies and procedures. Questions?
Mr. Holwell, on page 39, on page 7, this threw me off a little bit. Final strength is also consideration in funding decisions. The applicant should be, and it stops there. What is that?
We could period and then cut the rest of it off if we need to.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like something you copied over correctly.
Okay, on line 46, productive life of proposed improvements. Does that also go back to the PPA, right? Once that life of improvements, is that proposed improvements of the business, retail business, increase in gross receipts tax?
So when the business comes into town and they improve the parking lots or the roads or the area in which they go, and they're looking at something that has a 5-year window, and then they're going to have to redo it because of the quality of the construction or whatever else, then that would be a consideration in their incentive, and perhaps we do not want to incentivize them for up to the 10 years. It would only be up to the 5 years. So it's just trying to map the impact they're making to our community with the incentive that the community is willing to provide them to get them to be here.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if the life of that asset is only for 5 years, we wouldn't want to incentivize it for up to 10 years.
Who's defining the lifetime of that asset? They are or we are?
Well, when we're working with the applicant and going through their application process, what the improvements they're making, once again, what qualifies for LEDA funds are land, building, and infrastructure. And so when you're looking at which is all basically infrastructure improvements, and so I'm going to lump that all together. And so the life of a building is going to be longer than 10 years. The life of a parking lot is going to be longer. I mean, sewer lines that qualify, those assets are all longer than 10 years. If you got into industrial projects, where big incentive packages are potentially being put into place for years that obviously extend longer than 10 years, similar to what we have with Southwest Cheese, then the life of those assets may start coming into play.
Got it. So we're just under the base assumption that all of the improvements are going to be longer than the 10-year incentive, and so that we don't have to define them by it.
Correct.
Okay.
Moving on to page 8, and looking at lines 21 and 22, we had great conversation with the task force on this particular verbiage. And it simply states, please note, developers of projects for retail shall not be eligible for consideration for incentives under this program. And so when we start looking at developers, we start thinking about individuals that are in the business of maybe constructing a strip mall. Well, that strip mall can certainly house tenants that are eligible because they're generating gross receipts tax and providing to that gap. The strip mall itself does not fill any of the gaps. And so what a developer would then do would go out and start looking for those tenants prior to him building to tie in those deals. And so the developer themselves as a standalone will not qualify for this particular program as recommended by the task force. So any questions regarding developers?
Yes. And thank you for talking about that, because I do have line 21 and 22, as you just addressed. Question in regards to the developers. Based on your scenario, if a developer rents one of the retail spaces, then that individual, even though he's developed that space, but that renter would qualify for retail?
Correct, because rent is a qualifying expense for getting an incentive back. And so how that developer could recruit that particular tenant is saying, hey, you can go qualify for this particular program, and you're going to get rebated based off of your gross receipts tax generated, et cetera, for your rent up to 50% as we currently have it defined within the program itself. And so he can use that as a recruitment tool for tenants coming into his building.
And that tenant would be the applicant and not the developer?
Correct.
Yeah. If you could go to line 16, it says startup applicants may submit a business plan. In some of the development projects that I've been involved with, even sometimes through state LEDA require a business plan. Should it be shall instead of may?
That's language that came out of the original.
That was language that came out of the original. I mean, we can certainly change it to shall.
And we haven't, if I can address this to Mr. Malloy or Ernie, has some of the businesses that have put in, if I remember correctly, I've seen some of the business plans, are they required during the process, in order to put the deal together or the project
big
together, do
businesses,
you
they don't
require
have
a business plan?
plan.
Or to see a business plan, at least? Or no? No, I'm
Industrial.
asking about projects that, yeah, you do, okay, thank you.
So
My thought was, if we're gonna be giving away tax dollars, should we not require a business plan?
Well, I guess in the the counter argument could be, is if they're able to provide a pro forma and financial statements versus a business plan, we could potentially accept those pro forma and financial statements and not have the business plan in place. So that's where, if we change it to shall, then they're required to provide that business plan versus their pro forma and financial statements being able to show that they have the financial capabilities to make the project work.
I'm okay with me.
Well, I would just say changing may to must doesn't change really what Justin just said. They can submit they must submit a business plan, or pro forma financials, so.
Right.
They ought to submit one of the two or
Right.
three.
One of the two.
Yeah.
So we're giving them options on how that they can get there.
You gotta wait for a business plan that can be.
And Mr. Blaschke, not to put you on the spot, but as a lending agent, would, from a bank standpoint of view, if somebody was coming in to take a loan and they brought in their financial statements to start up a business, would that be satisfactory if they can show that they have the financial capabilities of performing?
we are going to ask all the same questions which would be contained in a business plan. The skill of compiling and presenting business plans has waned dramatically over the past decade, and to require it in a predetermined format does not necessarily improve the quality or accuracy of information contained. And so, while the information there is what we want, sometimes it's much easier to get that information through a conversation with the applicant and through a review of financials in detail without having a formal business plan. There are also, because of the internet and its ease of use, a lot of places that you can plug and play business plans, and a large quantity that we review are garbage, quite frankly. So it's a lot of noise. It's a lot of filler material and verbiage that is just stuck in there for fluff. And when we get down to what really matters, what matters are those financial numbers. Where did you get your projections for sales? Where did you get your expense numbers? Are they accurate? I mean, let's talk nuts and bolts. So may, must, it could be helpful. I think the impetus here in this sentence is that would substantiate their business expansion. Where's the meat? What are you doing and how do you prove it? And that's going to vary case by case.
And a lot of times the meat is in the business plan.
Right.
I mean, and I understand what you're saying, but the Small Business Development Center here at Clovis Community College has worked with multiple small business and retail to get them grants, and some were required business plans, so they did that. So no, I'm okay of leaving it as may, or what Mr. Robinson suggested.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the EIB, Mr. Mondragon, the Clovis Economic Development Corporation will be putting all the application forms together. So the kinds of questions that they'll be asking, that the bank would be asking, is the same questions that will be in an application form, which will meet that criteria too.
Okay.
Where are you? Where's he wanting space?
Oh, for performer? Gotcha. Thank you. Any other questions on page 8? Page 9. Once again, the major component on this particular page is the retail gap impact analysis. And so, obviously based off of the financials that they're providing to us, that's what will give us the ability to say, you're gonna generate potential X number of supply into the community, which then falls within a certain portion or a percentage of the gap. And so, like I said earlier, the gap analysis is kind of the driving, leading component of these overall policies and procedures, as well as how we potentially award to a applicant.
Mr. Hobolt, on line 16, on page 9 there, at what point applicant may be required to pay for economic retail gap impact analysis may be required at what point?
Well, there may be projects that aren't within our particular gap analysis. And so that's how I envision that. So while they try to look at the various sectors within the analysis itself, they may not cover something. And so in order for us to continue on with the scoring, if we don't have that information available to us and are able to judge, then we may require them to provide that information to us. Any other questions?
Line 28, and this is just language. Projects are usually transmitted to the city commission. Should that be, projects are usually referred to the city commission for introduction?
It's just language we copied over.
Yeah, and then on line 34, applicant is expected but is not always required. So applicant may be required. The applicant and others qualified to answer questions should be present at all city commission meetings.
That's the same language.
It
It's
technically reads the same, but it's just preference.
I'm trying to just take a little softer approach.
That's
So how would you like it to say?
how would y'all like it? Yeah, we're
Splitting hairs, and I don't have many, so I don't care.
Page 10, this is where we really start getting into the meat and potatoes of the policies per se. So fees, we changed that. For industrial development projects, it's $5,000 and starts scaling up. We felt that obviously we're going to have administrative costs for reviewing the applications, et cetera. And so we narrowed that back down to a $1,000 fee. We did have discussion on what that fee should be, and wanted to make sure that the applicant if it's too low, we don't want to just have to be processing applications because somebody's given it a shot. We want to make sure the applicant has really thought about the program and thought about whether or not they qualify for it, to make sure that they're willing to put in a good application to where we're not just spending time reviewing the applications without them having much interest in the application itself. So we settled on $1,000 there. Questions before we get into the retail project criteria? Okay, hearing none. And so this is where we started to actually outline what an applicant would be eligible for. And so I'm going to skip down to line 41 and 42 because, or I guess starting on 40, because this is straight out of the state statute. And so what is eligible to be considered for LEDA funds is the purchase, lease, grant, construction, reconstruction, improvements, or other acquisition or conveyance of land, buildings, or other infrastructure. And then we defined infrastructure back up in the definitions section itself. But we are restricted to only those items, being able to develop our incentives based off of and the value of what those are. So we can't consider anything other than those. I have provided to you a spreadsheet, and I always like to make the numbers really small, so maybe only I can read them in case there's something wrong. and the spreadsheet itself summarizes what this language basically says. And so they decided, the task force made the recommendation of going up to 50% of that value. And so on the far right-hand side, in this particular example, you would see that they purchased a piece of land for $500,000. They had another $3 million worth of building improvements. So the total value is $3.5 million. So that, under the way we have it defined now, the applicant is able to receive up to 50% of that value back. And so up to that $1.75 million is what they could potentially receive back for a period, maximum period of 10 years to receive that reimbursement. So 50%, we talked on various different percentages to have in there. We were at 35% at one point and decided to make it more attractive and go up to 50%. Once again, up to is in the language. And so based on the strength of the application, it could range from, I suppose, 1% up to 50%. So any questions before moving on from the 50%? Okay. Then we also felt that 10 years is the maximum time we wanted to potentially expose ourselves to a particular contract. And so obviously with reimbursing some of that gross receipts tax back to the applicant, the city of Clovis is not receiving the benefits from those gross receipts taxes coming into our revenues. And so while we may have additional fire and police protection on a particular project, or if the community's growing, the longer that we are not receiving those, it could potentially take away from those revenues in which we fund most of our departments with, obviously coming out of our general fund. And so the task force itself felt that 10 years was a good number to put that maximum cap on to earn those back. The way it's set up is that since it is based off of taxable gross receipts, the applicant themselves, they're capped at that potential 50% mark. They could earn that, if they do really well, they could earn that back sooner than that 10 years takes. Or if they're doing more, not doing as well, then they may not earn it back within that 10 years. It's not, the number is capped. How fast they earn that back up to that 10 years is based on how well they do in business. Does that make sense? Then on number one, that is where we started looking at what percentage of gross receipts tax do we want to rebate back to that company after they've earned it and generated it. And so the city of Clovis, well, we all know our overall tax rate is 8.1875%. That's the overall currently before legislative changes happen in July. Out of that 8.1875%, the city receives a little bit more than 3.4%. The county is at 0.875%, and the state is at 3.9%. And so that's not right. The state's a little bit over 5%. Well, 3.9% because we get a state shared portion back from that state, which is included in our 3.4%. So that's how you get up to that 8.1875%. The committee thought, so out of our 3.4%, because that's what we're able to rebate back. We obviously can't dictate what happens with the county's funds or with the state's funds generated. We set up that 2.5% up to that, going back to that retailer. So once again, on this particular example, if that particular applicant has a reported taxable gross receipts of $10 million, their total gross receipts reported would be the $818,000, and then they would get rebated the $250,000. That's an annual, or whether they report, and the reporting requirements can change from business to business on how often they pay their taxes. And so they could pay those annually, they could pay those semi-annually. We will require them as part of the PPA to provide to us proof of receipt of payment. So we're making sure that they've paid it before we ever give them any funds back. Questions, comments? I know it's a lot.
Sorry to make you repeat yourself.
That's
Can you-
okay.
Can you tell me the percentage of gross receipts that's paid to the city? I mean, you went through the total rate's 8 point something, but how much is city gross receipts tax?
So the city gross receipts tax, we get a portion of the state's. So the state right now is at 5.1 some odd percent. We get a portion of that plus what the city of Clovis has implemented from either eighths or sixteenths or quarters of percent. And our current percentage is 3.4%.
Okay.
And so out of that, so if you, at that 3.4%, if it's 2.5%, which is equivalent to 73% of what we get.
Got it, thank you.
Okay. And once again, that's an up to number. So based on the quality of the applicant, how much of the gap they're potentially filling, that's when obviously the recommendations from initially the CED to the EIB would be made. EIB obviously having the opportunity to review those recommendations, make any changes if they see fit, make the recommendation to the city commission, who then of course would have the option of making any changes they saw fit, and then obviously the final approval or disapproval of the applicant.
Justin, in your scenario here, after I go through the 2.5% to the 73% to the 250,000, the 0.9125%, what is that?
That's the remaining portion the city collects.
Got it. So that's 27. So if I'm reading that correctly, that's 27% of the total refunded amount, which is 91,250.
Correct.
Correct. So for every $1 million in new sales generated by a retailer, it increases the money back to the city of Clovis by $9,000 annually. And the money back to the business by 25 grand, roughly. Rather than the city collecting the full 34,000. So we're not paying them anything out of LIDA funds. The retailer comes in and based on the business that they generate, they pay themselves back up to their 50% of their initial investment. And meanwhile, the city is continuing to generate net new 9,000 per million in sales that retailer does.
And so then the other thing that from internally, obviously the city of Clovis has funds that were approved by the voters. And so to hold those funds, making sure that they still get the percentage that was dedicated to them, that's where I started to have to back calculate in that they got held whole and then back calculated out how much that would remain to go into the other funds. And just, that's how we broke it down for our internal purposes.
So all of the other internal funds are accounted for in the 27%.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Question, comments? Moving on to page 11. So page 11, we wanted to create basically a pass-fail. And so obviously the number one criteria is, do you fit in the gap analysis? If you don't, then hey, no thank you. We're moving on to the next applicant. And then we put in there other things that, do you meet the statutory requirements? Do you have an initial demonstration of sufficient capital, ability to service debt, or evidence of an acceptable financing commitment to make the project work? No outstanding tax issues. And then you're going to comply with all federal, state, and local environmental laws, regulations, and rules. So some of these were similar to the industrial application. And then so we carried those ones over, added obviously the gap analysis that we obviously is the guiding principle behind all of this. So simple pass-fail. Do you meet this or not?
We need to update number one, because if they
And that's certainly a great point, and we can certainly, it would add language, project addresses the retail gap analysis as adopted by the Clovis City Commission or submitted by the applicant,
Or as determined
or as,
by
or as determined by the applicant.
project analysis.
I don't know that we need to change it at all, because even if a retailer brings a gap analysis to demonstrate their own eligibility, wouldn't the city commission have to approve that gap analysis?
Because it'd be part of the application that they're trying to show that they fit a gap, right? So that's why the language is already in there, because this is all coming to the city commission.
Okay.
So if we don't add that in there, then it's an automatic fail, because they don't meet the one that's already approved by the city commission.
Would we be accepting an analysis that they provide, or they would be paying for us to have it done?
Yeah,
I would say we want,
So do we just need to put a period after retail gap analysis? Because it's referenced throughout the document where that comes from.
So,
Well, it could be, I would say this, if, hearing what Ms. Tarson is saying, I mean, if an applicant comes to us and they're not currently in a gap analysis, we could say, well, we want you to use a third-party provider to get that gap analysis done. That way, we're bringing in another party to show that. And it's not them themselves doing the numbers.
right.
And so, even though the city commission, and to Mr. Jones's point, I think that as we say, or a gap analysis provided by a third party. That way, it's, like I said, not the applicant doing the gap analysis. It's an outside interest that they've paid for at that point.
Because the gap analysis under the ordinance or the rules is adopted by the city commission. So I really, and George,
So we give them the out within the procedures, if we don't have something that's, if their retail business is not part of the gap analysis already, we give them the ability to go out and pay for a gap analysis so they can show that while it's not in the one that's approved by city commission, that my retail is a gap here, and that's why I'm applying for this application. So we've given them that out in the procedures themselves, but if we go with this pass-fail right here that's currently in here, it doesn't matter if they pay for that or not, it's an automatic fail and their application stops.
Mayor had.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add, I think I agree with Commissioner Jones that we wouldn't want them to be kicked out on the first pass-fail question simply because perhaps our gap analysis has missed a gap that they have found. What I would say though is, and I think what would be important is that we recognize that the city commission adopts the gap analysis that would be used for determination. So if this application and this example were to move forward, I think the commission would ask city management to have whoever performed the approved gap analysis to refresh that data and confirm what the applicant's analysis says. We wouldn't simply ask the commission to just take the word of the applicant's analysis.
And hopefully all that will be done prior to it coming to the city commission, of course.
I would think it would have to be
Yeah.
if there was a disagreement between the gap analysis.
So then, maybe the language would be project addresses the retail gap analysis as adopted by the Clovis City Commission or provided by a third party and adopted by the Clovis City Commission. Is that what you're trying to say, Mayor? I can change the language to say that if that.
so pardon my ignorance on this. So, Mike, were you just asking that, so say I perform my own gap analysis and find that that doesn't fall within the city's gap analysis. I submit my application and then the city goes back and asks whoever did their gap analysis to verify the other gap analysis?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm imagining kind of a worst-case scenario where the city commission is considering a project. I doubt it would get to this point, but imagine they're considering a project and being asked to just simply, on the spot, look at the applicant's or the third-party gap analysis and assume that the
logistically, could we do that in a reasonable time frame?
Well, and I think so. There is no, and we didn't set timeframes on this as far as like how often we do a gap analysis, because we may have a gap analysis today and see, hopefully not, but no growth for 5 years. So what would be the point of updating that gap analysis, say every 2 years or every year, when we haven't seen any economic growth in the community? So, or if we say, you know, we're going to do a gap analysis every 2 years and we have a ton of growth before 2 years, we may need to update that gap analysis earlier than that.
Or you could lose business and have to do it.
So we're going to modify the language to what, Ms. Burrows?
A project addresses the retail gap analysis as adopted by the Clovis City Commission or provided by a third party and adopted by the Clovis City Commission. So the commission still has autonomy over that retail gap analysis.
And Ms. Burrows, you always have a great way of telling me what I was saying, or summarizing what I tried to say. But I think it's important that we recognize the power of the city commission to adopt the gap analysis. Otherwise, why would we adopt a gap analysis if we're just going to take the one that the applicant provides? So I think I really appreciate how you phrase that and would obviously take input.
And that was my point that you were talking about, because it was already adopted by the city commission, but the language, I think, it does fill that in, so I'm okay with that.
So page 12 and the top half of page 13, we obviously took the language that was, once again, in the industry policies and procedures and tried to make it work for retail. And so one of the first things that you'll notice up on line 7 is that we set a minimum threshold of 50 points. And so while we're not using this, we have the pass fail, and we say, okay, great, now you get to submit an application, or your application is valid. Now we want you to be a solid enough project, and you should be able to score at least 50 points out of all this scoring criteria. Which means if you're heavy in one area and light in another area and you're not to 50, you may have to up your corporate citizen promoting economic development as a good corporate citizen. Or, you know, you may need to up your number of local contractors and subcontractors that you're proposing on the project itself. And so we wanted to establish that minimum scoring to even continue to move on, I guess, in the application process. The next thing, what we really tried to do is, once again, using the gap analysis as our guiding principles. So then we looked at those and said, okay, how should points be awarded based off of the amount of gap opportunity that is there and the amount of opportunity that you're proposing to fill that? And then, of course, within the gap analysis, there may be sectors that there's only $1 million gap, in other sectors where there's a $200 million gap. And so we try to weight the points based on A, how much of a gap there is, and then how much of that gap are you proposing to fill. And so item 3 in the chart, that's where a majority of, that's how we try to capture all of that.
Well, after reading this and going through it, my response when I saw the 50%, I said, ugh. But anyway, I think it's fair because you did add the language that I was looking for, that all terms and conditions are subject to review, modification, and final approval by the Clovis City Commission. So I think that kind of gives it some weighing power to the commission to reevaluate that 50% as well.
And the other, looking at item 9, trying to encourage individuals to not just grow in one direction of the community, but recognizing that we do have MRA districts, we do have infill or property that's available to be for infill. And so putting some points towards those types of projects as well, we thought was important.
I would like to point out that there's a total of 120 points available. So it's not 50% of the points, it's 50 cumulative points. So it's a fairly low threshold. And in committee, we mocked up a number of scenarios at 40 points, 45 points. And in any of those instances, in our opinion, that proposed project or retailer was missing something critical that would be important to our city. And we really didn't want to bother the EIB and the city commission with additional applicants that didn't really fit what we were going for. So anyway, just a comment.
Thank you. Any questions on the scoring?
On line 2, is that 10 points just to give me, or how could you not be locally operated and generate gross receipts tax?
Target. It's not locally owned.
But it's locally operated. It's an or, isn't it?
Oh.
Locally owned or operated?
Yeah, to hit the spirit of what we're getting at, or operated probably needs to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good point, David.
Good catch.
That's why we like lots of sets of eyes.
For number 10, I mean, I understand why it's in there, but are we gonna, is that like an all 15, how's that gonna be allocated?
It can be scalable.
Scalable, okay. Can all of these be scalable?
I think most of them can.
Okay.
I mean, you either are or are not locally owned. I mean, that one's not,
Of course.
I mean, I guess hypothetically it could be 50% locally owned, but I don't know.
And once again, we point out that it's not an obligation to fund, that each project is still based off a case-by-case scenario. All right, moving on to the auditing requirements. Once again, very similar language that's in the industrial industry policies and procedures. Obviously geared it towards gross receipts reporting, and so just put in there that language. And obviously, most retailers don't like to give out their gross receipts that they're reporting or whether or not they've paid them. However, if you're coming to the city of Clovis asking to be a part of this program, we're going to require you to provide to us in order to determine what that refund would potentially look like. We're going to have your financials and access to your information. So,
Who all will get access to that?
finance,
Okay.
as well as myself.
Okay. But like, city council?
We just require a recommendation to the city of Clovis, or to the city commission, whether or not they're meeting the requirements of the PPA.
Justin,
So
I would
we
think-
don't have it in there that it has to go to the
Okay.
city commission.
Okay.
I was just gonna say it, usually staff, reviews that and audits that, and then makes those recommendations to the city commission. Without handing all those documents over.
So Justin, you're coming to the city commission with a report that says XYZ company paid XYZ, or it has fulfilled their obligation to pay their gross receipts tax.
Correct.
Got it.
And we keep that, and just for the new members that are on this board, that information stays in the hands of the CED. And so from a IPRA standpoint, Inspection of Public Records Act, that's not in the city of Clovis's hands. And so if somebody came and said, hey, I want City of Clovis, you to turn over any documents that you have regarding this particular business, we don't have those documents. And the CED doesn't fall underneath the IPRA requirements.
So for example, currently, with all the industrial ones that there are, annually they're required to provide audit of their performance over the past year to ensure that they're meeting the obligations of the agreement that the commission entered into. And so each year, CED submits a report to the commission, which is then acted on upon the commission to accept or deny it. It's always been accepted so far. So you'll see several of them on the agenda next week.
All right. So that is a summary of the policies and procedures that the task force has established. And of course, the appendix is where we list who the agent is, mailing addresses, etc. Would you like us to try and make sure that we've caught all the changes before making a recommendation?
Yes, I'd like to see that.
Okay.
We're going to talk about it now.
Yes. So on page 4, line 13, after the chairperson of EIB, or we're going to add or designee.
And I've said the chairperson of EIB, or EIB designee, just not any designee. It would have to be somebody from the EIB.
On page, and the spaces and stuff we'll just capture, the formatting. On page 6, line 29, removing this and replacing it with the LEADA for Retail Policies and Procedures Manual.
And Commissioner Jones, on page 8, were you saying you'd like pro forma to be one word or 2 words?
One.
Because in Merriam-Webster's, it's 2 words.
Oh, bless Merriam-Webster. In Latin, it's one.
Yeah, if you look at line 17, it says, well, pro forma. Yeah, okay, never mind.
Pro forma's 2. Yeah, okay, just checking. Okay. I'm leaving that alone. Sorry.
Okay.
Miriam outweighs the hat.
It means the same. It's the same. And on page 10, line 44, it should be receipts shouldn't be in there after sales. It should be generated by the sales from the retail project, not sales receipts. So we'll remove receipts. And then on page 11, under the pass-fail criteria, number 1, Ms. Burrows revised it to?
Project addresses the retail gap analysis as adopted by the Clovis City Commission or provided by a third party and adopted by the Clovis City Commission.
Thank you. Page 12, under item number 2, just company locally owned, removed or operated. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. With that, happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Any questions from the members, public? So do we need a motion on this, or is this what?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'll stand for a motion to accept this with revisions.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Say all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Ayes are above the nose. pass. All right, so let's go on to discussion and action regarding proposed changes to ordinance number 2052, 2015 pertaining to economic development. Justin Howald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Of course, we just adopted the policies and procedures, and we don't have yet authority to do so. And so the ordinance obviously had to be revised and introduced and adopted to give us the authority to actually be able to implement these policies and procedures. And so once again, what we did is took the existing ordinance and modified it to allow us to address retail sector within our local ordinance. We also made some changes in regards to, rather than calling out business, we changed it to qualifying entities. So there could be several different qualifying entities, and so we didn't want to limit ourselves on that term. And we've actually put we have a definition for qualifying entities in there, so that covers a much broader spectrum within the document itself. And so, of course, on page 2, you'll see that we added in there retail, business and retail in there as well. And then we also, on page 17, we added in the additional article and section from the statutes itself. What you'll see also in this document, and it's not going to be in the changes, but what we highlighted was the fact, and I know that this board has in the past discussed changing the 50% of business revenue coming from a customer base outside the state of New Mexico. And so just wanted to highlight that and say that's something that this board has considered changing in the future as well. It obviously was not up to this task force to address those issues, but just wanted to keep that up in front of you and keep that on your minds as something that needs to be addressed as well in the future. Of course, on page 4, added in on line 3 and 4, retail businesses that meet the city of Clovis's gap analysis, and then made the highlight of requiring the 50% again. Still not going to be in these changes, but something just to keep in your minds. Infrastructure, that's where we talk about what qualifies for infrastructure. We added in there parking lots and site improvements, and so previously those weren't as part of that definition. However, if you're building a retail business, you're going to be building a parking lot. That is infrastructure. You're making site improvements. If you're having to bring in fill, if you're having to make on-site sewer line improvements, etc., that is infrastructure. And so we added those to the definition of infrastructure as well. Then on page 5, we added, obviously under C, we added and I, because we created the definition, which is the definition as defined in the state statute for retail. Page 7, once again, we were referencing economic-based businesses and industry that will create high-wage jobs for the area. We just said qualifying entities. If you qualify, then you're automatically allowed to go through this process. And so we felt that just shortening it to say qualifying entities made sense. And so that's reflected throughout the document as well. Once again, on page 9, picked up the definition for goods and commodities as identified in the current City of Clovis gap analysis as adopted by the Clovis City Commission. That brief summary, I would open it up to the board for any questions or comments you may have on the ordinance itself.
Page 9, item C, shouldn't that be I and not H? I, not H.
Where is he?
No, because it goes to the next page, isn't it? It's and H. H is on the following page, under this section.
Retail business, yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to, in the future, revisit that 50%.
I agree.
That was an issue with the Bandolero, if you recall that. But in light of the changes and the reviews, we need a motion to move this forward to the city commission. So I'll make a motion that we approve the changes to ordinance number 2052-2015.
Seconded.
We have a motion and a second to recommend these changes to the city commission. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, we will also be making changes. It doesn't impact this board, but it impacts this board. The changes to the ordinance itself, the makeup of this body, which is established by the city commission, the rules and responsibilities. We have made some minor changes to that to add the retail in there. But obviously, since the city commission makes up those responsibilities, that's why we didn't bring it to this board. But
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Malloy, Ernie Koss, would you like to give us a report on the CED projects? Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members, Mr. Mayor. Before I jump in, and I'll be brief because we're running late, I just want to say that I thoroughly enjoyed serving on the Leader Retail Committee, and I want to publicly thank the mayor for his leadership. He has been a driving force in all of this and helped us craft what you reviewed today, and he had the vision, and hopefully we've executed on it. So with that, I'll jump right in. We've had 3 potential recruitment opportunities from the New Mexico partnership that we responded to. One is healthcare telemedicine headquarters, 10,000 square feet, scaling to 30,000. We've sent them data on the call center. The next is a data center cryptocurrency type center. They want 100,000 square feet. And we've offered a build-to-suit in the industrial park. And the third is a manufacturing facility related to rail. And they're looking for about 30 acres in the industrial park, and we've provided that. I want to show this document that we've been working on. It's a brochure that we've been working on with Leighton and Moon. It's about 13 pages currently. We're almost finished with it. It'll be available in hard copy and digital, but it talks about the community and highlights our labor, demographics, housing costs, educational opportunities. It's got a bit in there on the call center and also the industrial park. So it's a real nice document that matches the rebranding, and I think we're going to be real proud of it. Real quickly on the projects, we've been working with a solar manufacturing company. I would say they're as much a technology company as they are a manufacturing company. They've got a relationship with companies in Germany, and they're building prototypes in Germany at the moment. They'll be shipped over here when they're done for validation. I think they're going to partner potentially with Texas Tech and possibly even Eastern New Mexico to help out with those validation procedures and whatnot. But they've made a site visit to Clovis, accompanied by the New Mexico Economic Development Department. They really like Clovis. They're looking at the Alltech facility, and that would be their first choice. If that doesn't work out, then I think we're prepared to offer them some other opportunities that might work out. We've been working with a solar company that would like to partner with Southwest Cheese and locate out there near Southwest Cheese and do a utility scale project and perhaps feed Southwest Cheese behind the meter. And they're working with Southwest Cheese on identification of maybe approximately 300 parcels and put in maybe up to a 30 megawatt solar farm out there. So that's pretty exciting. We've been working on another solar energy project that is working on numerous parcels for lease. We should have the lease finalized on CIDC property out by the landfill by the end of the week, where they would do the community scale project, but they're looking at larger parcels to do a utility scale project. We've are in early discussions with a food processing plant that is contemplating a facility in Clovis or West Texas. We continue to work with the truck stop. I would say there's not been a great deal of progress. They need the state of New Mexico on board to put the turning lane in. The New Mexico needs, I would say, several things: traffic study and a site plan provided by an engineer, and that's yet to be done. And I don't think that project will move forward until that's accomplished. We've spent extensive time working with an ammonia manufacturing, green ammonia manufacturing project. They originally reached out to us, and they had a list of 25 locations that they were looking at. They've notified us that we've made the cut from 25 down to 10. They really like the area. They need considerable space in the industrial park. They want to do this green. When you think about green ammonia, think green hydrogen. It's got broad support both from Santa Fe and the federal government. I think there probably is some opportunities there from incentives from the government bodies. They consume a tremendous amount of electricity, and in conversations with them, I said, how would you folks like your own dedicated wind farm? And they got pretty excited about that. So I remember in some far corner in the back of my mind that the Grady Martin Wind Project by Apex was fully permitted, and my last conversation with them last year was, bring us a customer and we'll put the wind farm in. So as a result of that conversation, I have connected the dots between these two companies, and so they're now discussing timelines and how that might work out. So potentially we could develop the Grady Martin Wind Project along with this project as well. So it's exciting. We spent a lot of work on it, a lot of time working on it. They've got an extensive site selection questionnaire that we've been working through, and should present that this afternoon on our meeting then. Let's see. We've been working with a company called Natural Chem. They've invested a lot of time and money in engineering and feasibility studies and the like for glycerin and biodiesel. They would like to apply for LEDA funds. We've explained to them that they need some prior investment in the project because they want the funding for, I would say, engineering and reports and things like that. I don't know how this project will move off High Center, but we'll continue to work with it. We've been working with a processing, I'd call it a food processing facility, potentially up to 1,400 jobs, trying to understand the parameters of the project, their water needs, and exactly what we need to do to help this project to fruition. Another exciting project. Last on my list, I think, is a call center prospect that came in earlier in the week, and they submitted questions. I've offered the call center, and they're in early discussions, but potentially we could land something in the call center. It wouldn't require the entire call center, so we'd have room left in there for something additional. The last thing I'll report is that we've been working on the annual audit reports to comply with the project participation agreements and understand what their pilots look like, and we'll have that available shortly. And I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions?
Busy.
Been busy.
I think you sound like you've been busy,
Thank
Brother Lee.
Ernie, fill in the color.
Mr. Chairman and committee, mayor and everybody, as you can hear from the prospect report, we've been very, very busy. And there's a lot of activity going on as it relates to all the different prospects. But in addition to that, we continue to work on branding, also Clovis Remote, and what's our other big deal? Our gigabits promotion. to recruit industry for that. So it's just been really busy. I mean, a lot of the things that we're doing now, I have to admit, Chase did, like the audits that Claire mentioned earlier. So it's been a little learning curve, but we're getting them. We're getting there. So we had to get the audits for Southwest Cheese, Pattern Energy, for Cummins, and I can't remember the other one. I think there was 4 audits that we just did recently. So yeah, it's been really busy, and in addition to that, we went through the whole legislature and kept up with that. We didn't have any of our events, but kept up with all the things related to business, and in addition to that, we are still going to organize the post-legislative event. We haven't got a date on that yet since they just came back from special session. So, and the other thing that's different that I have is that we're cutting the ribbon for lots of our new businesses, especially cannabis. And so it's been a whirlwind, but thank you all for your support.
Thank you, Ms. Goss. Ray Mondragon has a report he wants to give, but we'll go on to the good of the order now. Anybody have anything?
Mr.
Mr. Mayor.
I promise to be brief.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Economic Incentive Board members, when you're mayor, you really come to appreciate the team. And I just wanted to thank each of you, and especially thank the LEDA Task Force for the work that you did on what you have approved today. And I believe that what you're recommending to the City Commission is a big thing. And when you think about how it is that we're going to do big things and good things, it's together. And this has been a tremendous team effort. I'm grateful for your work on that, and I just wanted to say thank you to the team.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for all your work as well. Mr. Mondragon, would you like to give a report on the 2022 Economic Development Week?
Yes. We will be engaged in the 2022 Economic Development Week here in Clovis. We are partnering with the Clovis-Curry County Chamber of Commerce, Clovis Economic Development, Clovis Main Street, Department of Workforce Solutions, and Eastern Plains Council of Governments, Curry County, and certainly the city of Clovis. The mayor will be, and the city commission will be presenting a Economic Development Week proclamation on May the 5th, city commission meeting at 5:15. I'd like to see some of our members there, if you can make that, along with the Chamber of Commerce and anyone from CED. We're planning a whole week of activities, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. And on May the 10th, Deputy Secretary John Clark from the Economic Development Department will be here. We're putting together a economic development roundtable or business roundtable. And we're in the process of developing that calendar for that week. I've had mentioned it to David Robinson. I probably would like to take the Deputy Secretary to Plateau for a tour of what they have in your new center there. And because broadband every year is a big issue in the legislature, as you know, as you're aware, David. And we've also invited Secretary Alicia Keys, the Secretary of Economic Development, Secretary Jen Schur from the Tourism Department. We've also extended an invitation to Governor Lujan Grisham for May the 12th. And we have been contacted by the governor's office. I spoke to the mayor about that, and so we are waiting for final decision on the governor being here. And we're hoping that in conjunction with all of our partners on this Economic Development Week in the chamber, that we would hopefully have a luncheon for the governor. And we thought that would be an opportune time for her to be here based on the $20 million to the Water Authority, and I believe the $750,000 to the Senior Citizen Center. And so we thought that would be a good. The county will also be presenting a proclamation, and the state will be presenting a proclamation to the city of Clovis for Economic Development Week. So we're in the stages of developing that. We have a 10:30 virtual Zoom this morning with all of our partners in the committee, and hopefully we'll be able to have something good and positive for our city for that week. May 13th is, and this is ironic that May the 9th to the 13th of 2022 is Economic Development Week. May 13th is Chase Gentry's birthday. And so we'll also be thinking of him during this week as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mondragon. Anything else?
Yes, just a brief update about the TIP strategies work that they're doing for the Economic Development Plan for the city. They will be having the second meeting with the steering committee next Thursday at 9 o'clock via Zoom, and they're actually going to be in town on June the 1st and 2nd. And I will be reaching out to a couple of the larger businesses to see if they would be willing to take them on a tour to have a look. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, all in favor, stand up. Closing this meeting? Thank you. I gotta go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm just saying what is the current.
See you, Joseph.
We'll see ya. Thank you, Gail.
I'm gonna miss not seeing you every day.
Hey, see you later.